fascinating to me. All right, so the reason we talk so much about mindfulness is because when we have that builds self-awareness, right? And when we're able to build that self-awareness, we're able to improve our emotional IQ, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But what that is also management of conflict. So last time you talked and you spent some time really thinking about your conflict style and hopefully kind of, really understanding at least where you are and how you really feel about conflict, right? Because in theory, we want to handle conflict well. In theory, we want to address a problem. It's like, yes, I know this needs addressed. I know that something needs addressed. But when it comes time to face your best friend, your parent, your romantic partner, your boss, right, your colleague, it can be more overwhelming, right? Emotions can get the best of us. And so there's this play between what's logical, what we know needs to happen, and emotional, what our feelings are allowing us to happen. So to start, before we do a little bit more discussion on conflict and emotional intelligence, back in your groups, you're going to look at, I'm not sharing anymore, am I? Let me reshare real quick. Okay, so back in those groups, you are going to look at what you've noticed since that kind of initial awareness about your conflict style, how you typically handle conflict at any level or in any context. So maybe at work you don't handle it well or you try to avoid it. Maybe with your roommate or your best friend or your parent, maybe you handle it differently. So talk about how you're handling them in different spaces, but also like what you're the same. Maybe you're avoiding it everywhere. And then also to whatever level that you're comfortable with your group, and you'll come back to this conflict here in a little bit. So all I want you to do is share about a conflict you've experienced since our last meeting and your initial response. Now it can be, someone at work is eating your lunch. It can be something even more serious, just whatever level that you're comfortable with, but please identify some conflict from the past month that has come up. And it may not have been dealt with yet, but something that exists currently, which typically conflict is a battle over power, or resources, right? Resources like time, resources like money, resources like your wonderful turkey sandwich that someone keeps eating, whatever that is, right? So it's usually resources and power is what most of our conflict comes down to. And so back in your groups, and maybe 125, we want to say, if everybody's clock is the same, that gives like 3.5 minutes or so, about 125 to come back into the space. Does that sound good? Okay, so what have you noticed about conflict? Share something that's come up. Great. All right, hopefully we're back to Yoda. And if that's not the case, let me know. But hopefully you had just some time to kind of think about like, yeah, this is how I am. And it doesn't matter. Every single conflict style has some great benefits and has some challenges, right? Obviously, we want to move towards that collaborating and that compromising. But also an issue that people in that category might have is they want to solve every problem. And sometimes problems are unsolvable. Sometimes there's no way that you can find something that serves everyone's needs. And so they have to take a step back and be like, okay, this is not a time to just like, we're not going to be able to talk through it. Like you can communicate, you can over communicate too. So know that every type of conflict style is valuable. All right, so Max Lucado says that conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. That's sometimes a problem for avoiders and accommodators is that they think that every form of conflict is heading to combat and that it's heading towards termination, right? I'm going to get fired, we're going to break up, my roommate's going to move out, whatever it is. Sometimes those accommodators and avoiders would rather just keep the peace than deal with the issue, but that sacrifices their needs in any kind of situation as well. So understand that it doesn't have to be combat. Conflict is just a natural human element. And most of the time, everybody wants everyone to be happy, right? They want you to be satisfied too. So let's talk a little bit about how we can manage conflict. These are some great tools to stop, think, listen, and communicate throughout the entire conflict management process. So stopping is very similar to mindfulness in that you are physically and mentally taking time to be present within the conflict. And this means being vocal about if you don't have the mental bandwidth to logically assess a situation. Like, I understand you can say things like, I understand this is important, but I don't think I can I can handle this right now. I don't think I can help solve this problem right now. I need some time to reset. Whatever that is, understanding that you need to be present both physically because face to face is so much better in safe situations. It's just much better to handle conflict that way. So physically present, but also that mentally present and having that emotional bandwidth and mental bandwidth too. Throughout the process, you want to think, which is considering the conflict itself and what you're trying to communicate. This is considering possible causes and outcomes, having the foresight to think about, okay, before I address this conflict with my boss, with my colleague, with my partner, what is the issue? Like, what is causing me to feel a certain way or creating a problem, crossing a boundary? And what do I need to happen on the other side? And so you can consider possible ways to either solve it or long-term outcomes, which sometimes means terminating of a relationship as well. If you max out at an employer and there's no way you can give of X amount of salary because of whatever policy they have, but you can switch companies or industries and double your salary, that might be something that they can't solve there, and you have to meet that need elsewhere. And so that's what happens sometimes in different types of relationships, is that you just need that this person or context or space cannot meet your need, so you have to go find that need elsewhere. So then you need to listen throughout the process as well. This is crucial, especially when there's criticism. So we talked a little bit last time about constructive criticism and trying to hear out the whole process, but this is truly suspending judgment to interpret the message, trying not to take things personally, trying to understand that they have needs and you have needs, and they're not trying to attack you necessarily. Now, maybe they are, maybe they're using some toxic communication strategies, but even in their attack of you, there's still some other need that they're trying to get met. So try to listen without too much judgment, just like the TikTok trend. If you're on TikTok, if I can say TikTok, just like that trend of, we listen and we don't judge. Same thing in those conflict spaces. The difference is that you are listening in order to approach it with some kind of solutions or outcomes. So also, obviously, you want to communicate dependent on the completion of prior steps. It's the hardest component. So you're making yourself present, you're considering what the issue is and the outcomes, you're willing to listen, and then the hard part comes with communicating your needs or your preferences and something. And a lot of times it's hard for us because we don't want to hurt the other person. Maybe you've been at a job that you've enjoyed working there, but it's not meeting your needs. And so it's very hard to submit your resignation or to leave your colleagues, right? And so those changes are difficult, and that's where that communication part becomes very difficult, but very important to understand that. So this is just personal brainstorming right now. I want you to just think about your own conflict that you just talked about, the conflict that you've encountered this month. Have you had a chance to consider the needs of the conflict? So what is the need? What's not being met? What is the conflict about? Is there a boundary that's been crossed? Is there a struggle for power? Is there another resource like time or money or turkey sandwiches that are at play? So what is that context there? And then have you thought about some solutions for that? So I'm going to give you guys, literally, it's going to feel weird. I'm going to give you a full 60 seconds in silence while we're all just here present to think about these things for your conflict. So take 60 seconds to do that. Okay, start bringing those thoughts to a close. Um, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do in this brainstorming is if you were to address this conflict with whomever, your boss, your colleague, your best friend, whomever you're thinking of with this current conflict, how do you think the conflict would sound to them? And what do you think their response would be? So I'm going to give you just another 25 seconds to think about that. What would they immediately think about the conflict if they knew about it, if they don't already know about it? And what do you think their response would be? Okay, so as you've thought about that, that is probably the primary reason, whatever you thought, of why you will or will not address this particular conflict, right? Because you're worried it might hurt them. You're worried that they will get defensive. Maybe you're worried that they'll think differently of you if you express a particular need. Maybe you think that they'll have different feelings towards you or be ready to avoid a situation. There's there's a lot of reasons why we don't address conflict, but the primary reason is because we're afraid of what it might do to the person we care about or to the place of employment, right? And the people or the spaces that we like in there. And what happens is smaller conflicts, we let them bury. It's called rumination. And it's part of that emotional process until we've filled up a gunny sack worth of conflicts, right? And then we hurt them more because we've reached a maximum, right? We have a point maximum of what we can manage and carry emotionally, that bandwidth. And when that is full, we just kind of start spewing things, right? Which it's like if you took a drink, I took this Dr. Pepper, I put the lid on it, and I shook it up for 5 minutes, and then I took the lid off, what would happen? It would be a mess, right? And that's how we are too when we bury those things. And so trying to address conflict as it arises is the best thing for longevity of relationship or employment, whatever kind of relationship that you're talking about. And it's the best thing for managing long-term conflict as well. So be thinking about those things here. You're going to have some time here in a moment to talk about your conflict again with your group, and then a sample work. So some other tools to have during this process. So before you address a conflict, so there's a before, during, and after. It's a multi-stage thing. We often think as, okay, I'm going to talk about it right now and then it's over. But that's not usually how it works out. We've been thinking about something for a lot longer than the other person usually knows it. And so that's the first thing to consider is you've already processed this issue for however long, a day, a week, a year, before you address it to this other person. And until the other person knows, it's not interpersonal conflict. It's just intrapersonal. It's just your own conflict that you're carrying until you've let them know. Now, one of the things you can do is if you know that if they might need some time to prepare or think about the situation, let them know, hey, there's been something that's been bothering me. I'd like to talk to you about X, Y, or Z. Let's do this in a couple of days. And then they have time to process it too, especially the larger the conflict, maybe the better the fair warning. However, what often happens is like they realize there's a problem and they want to address it right then, right? So sometimes it's good to address it minimally and then come back and revisit. But as a whole, before any conflict, you want to figure out a place that you can address it in private, as long as everything's safe, right? If there's a safety issue in any context, that's privacy's out, honesty's out. Everything you do is just to be safe. But we're not talking about it in that context today. So address whatever it is in private. If it's a colleague in an office, or maybe sometimes it's a mediator like a manager. If it's a friend or a partner or a family member, figure out a good time to have a conversation with them. The hardest thing for people is to hear something in public and they immediately want to save face, right? It's all about saving reputation. And so when you put them in that spot, it's harder for them to process this logically. So private address. You want to make sure that you know the issue. Like you're really upset with someone, and if you don't really know why, it's not the time to bring it up. You have to process why you're upset first, and then make sure you're ready to be present, to focus on being there completely, and then also examine yourself. If the issue is, wow, my colleague never responds to my text fast enough when I'm asking about a project that we're working on, right? Is there an issue? Are you texting 17 times a day, right? Are you texting enough information? Were you clear about the urgency? So you want to make sure that there's not anything that you're doing to contribute as well, as you go into it. During the conflict is where especially you want to use this DESC scripts, where you'll describe what's happening, express how you feel, not how they're doing or how they feel or what they're doing. Specify your needs or the goals, like what would you like to get in the end? And then are there any consequences that you need to address if it's not met, right? If X needs not met, if I cannot get a increase in salary, I will have to find other employment, right? So that could be you're specifying your need and you're saying that there is a consequence in the end, right? So think these through as well as you go to address. And so during a conflict conversation, you want to use an appropriate place and time, like we mentioned, not around a lot of people, do it in private. You want to do it when they can access things logically and not when they've had a really big, long emotional day. And then you want to actively listen. So when they have a chance to speak, let them speak, right? Don't interrupt, don't address. You can make mental notes, you can address something in a moment, but let them speak and just listen. Work together. So figure out, okay, this is an issue for you. I realize I'm texting you 17 times a day and you are also working on other projects and it's too overwhelming to constantly address my text messages. So you need me to reach out less often, right? So there might be needs for your relational partner too. But brainstorm solutions on how you can fix that and meet those needs. Really crucial is to use I language throughout the entire conflict process. So that means that you're saying things like, I really need information on how to proceed with my project. I really feel valued when you respond to me, even if it's a response of, I will reach back later. Like you're saying it from your perspective. The moment you start using the you word, you language, you're verbally finger pointing, right? You never respond to me. You act like I don't exist, right? Those are different things than owning your own experience and your own emotions. And so very, very important to always express using I language. And that's valuable for a lot of reasons. Number one, you're not damaging the relationship, right? It doesn't feel like you're trying to attack the character of your roommate, your boss, whomever. But at the same time, you're not giving them power either, right? If you say, you make me so frustrated or you make me so happy, you're giving them all of the power of your own emotions, right? And so we don't want to do that either. You want to hold the power of your own identity and your own self and awareness and experiences. But at the same time, you don't want to polarize them and make it feel like it's a true competition if it's me versus you. So again, you want to describe that perspective, like how you see the problem, and express empathy, like, wow, I didn't realize that I was doing this or that this was creating an issue. I appreciate that, right? So really having that open conversation with them, but listening is such a key element here. After the conflict, so you've decided on something, you've addressed it, you know what the problem is, maybe you have some solutions, maybe you're going to reach back out in a few weeks, whatever it is. You need to evaluate if there's other issues. Is there something else going on that you need to address or that maybe you need to have them address? And then keep it in perspective. So how important is this conflict? How much will it matter tomorrow or next week or next month, right? And so the longer the foresight, right, the more impactful on your life or on your well-being, the more relevant it is to manage the conflict. You want to try to end positively if possible, right? Sometimes in conflict, you get too worked up and you need to take a break, and that's totally okay. To say, you know what, I think we should take a break, a breather, let's revisit this tomorrow, is much better than just someone getting up, slamming the door, and leaving the office, right? Because now how do you come back? How does that work? What does that look like? And so it's really, really difficult. It's called stonewalling. It's another form of toxic communication. And so if you need a break, say so. Say, can we please readdress this later? But when you're at the end, try to end positively. Paraphrasing is a great way to do it. Saying, I understand this is the conflict, or I understand this is how we'll address it moving forward. And then follow up. So this is like after. If you've asked for your colleague to respond to your text messages quicker about your projects, and they do, let them know. Say, hey, I really appreciate you. Thank you. You've helped me stay better on track. I've been able to stay on my schedule, whatever that is. Let them know that you appreciate the efforts that they've made for that. Now, there is a time to avoid conflict. Okay. So there's three major things to hold on to in any context. So it doesn't matter if it's personal, professional, whatever. If the risk is too great, back to that safety issue, if there is any question about your safety, it's not worth it. Additionally, maybe it's a very small detail, small thing in the office. Maybe you prefer name brand Post-its and your office only provides generic Post-its, right? If you're complaining about Post-its, you're risking likely issues with collegiality, issues with budget management, maybe issues with just your job or promotion, right? When we complain about things that don't really matter or have a real impact on something. Now, if you have to have Post-its that you're creating a plan and it's up on the wall and the other ones just don't stick, it's relevant, right? Suddenly relevant. So really consider your risks when you address anything. If the conflict is minor, like it's not going to be a big deal, it's not going to matter tomorrow, like someone's making a loud noise with their pen because they're having a nervous day, but if you yell at them, you're gonna have some issues long term with that. Can you just walk away and try not to listen to the pin click and maybe they'll feel better tomorrow, right? So if it's a minor conflict, it's best not to address it. Usually it's draining for you, it's draining for them over a pin click, right? And then if it's an unimportant relationship, like, is this somebody that you work with closely on a daily basis? That matters. Is it someone that you see occasionally in the elevator that's going to a separate office? Probably doesn't matter, right? So avoid conflict when it's not relevant, when it's not useful long term. Okay. All right. So first thing I'm going to have you guys do is go into your groups again for just a couple of minutes and think about that original conflict, whatever that conflict was that you had. And I want you to think about sharing that, right? If you haven't addressed it, do you think you will and why? Like, does it fit into these avoiding? Have you addressed it? Do you think you addressed it well? And what do you think their response would be? So as a whole, share with your group whether or not you will address this conflict and why. So let's give you just about 3 minutes on that, and then we're going to come back and we're going to practice a workplace conflict example. Okay, I think that I have audio figured out. So welcome back. I hope you had a chance to just kind of think through the process of how you would handle this conflict. And know that you can't possibly consider and guess every possible scenario or outcome or response, right? And so really this is just about trying to prepare the best you can, which helps to avoid some of the other issues. So I would love to hear how many groups were there? Maybe 4 or 5 groups? Okay, so I would just love to hear from one person from each group if you would just share how your group would handle it. Don't worry about what other people say. Maybe it's similar, maybe it's different, but tell me how your group would approach this conflict.
Okay, I'll go first.
Thank you.
So our group basically talked about like boundaries. Depending on what conflict you have, you can set like good or bad boundaries within the conflict. Um, so we just thought that boundaries would be good just because if you set that, you are able to understand more about the conflict and more about what you're having that problem with that person.
Okay, and when you're talking about boundaries, do you mean boundaries for handling that conflict specifically? Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a great idea. It's always a great idea. These become what we call conflict rituals, part of our conflict ritual, which is when if you and your whoever your partner is, your relational partner, your colleague, you know that every time there's a conflict, you're going to create some boundaries, or you've created boundaries for all conflicts. So you know what to stay within, right? But once you've already had really difficult conflict, it's hard to circle back and recreate new rituals, right? So I think that's a great approach for any conflict. What else would you guys do?
I can pick up for the next group.
Thank you.
We had kind of discussed that, especially considering having to be very meticulous and planned and on time is equally neurotic as having to be under the pressure and last minute all the time.
Yeah.
That there's definitely a balance to be found. And one way to do that is in setting, let's say you're working in sprints, set fresh deadlines for your other person, and you can plan closer deadlines that this task has to be done and mitigate that. That way they can still work in their bursts and you can still have your planning abilities to be close instead of having it all done at the deadline.
Yeah, I love that idea. So setting some previous deadlines, right? So saying are going to agree on some other deadlines, and they can still wait until the last minute for that deadline, but that still gives you the information or whatever that you need to continue to move forward towards that ultimate deadline. That's great. I love that idea. What else would y'all do?
Our group talked about the same thing similar to what Donovan just mentioned, but also adding like a little check-in one-on-one to see how progress is going. Because like I mentioned, I have a hard time getting stuff started when I look at the whole picture, and having someone else's perspective to minimize it really helps.
Yes, I love that too. I know a lot of people, they get soured on group work, right? And a lot of it is because this reason exactly, right? That you just have a hard time finding that person that you work well with. And it does sometimes create a little bit more work. Sometimes there's more natural rapport in those things, but most of the time we're not going to be partnered with someone just like us. So I love that idea of coming together periodically, just as checking in and how are you doing? Is this working, right? Even questioning your current boundaries or deadlines. Have we set this up correctly? And then hearing how it's impacting someone else or how they're seeing the situation ongoing, rather than waiting until the big end and seeing how feedback on all the way through. So I love that. It's a great idea. What else?
So our group was talking about kind of similar to previous answers of like sitting down, making a time to actually like meet physically and have a conversation about it, and splitting up responsibilities to best suit the strengths of each person, so the person who needs the planning, needs it to be done quickly, does the stuff that needs to be done on the front end, and the other person is allowed to kind of do anything that could put on the back burner or can done towards the back end of a project later on, in so long as the work is still getting done and it's not procrastinating to the point of it falling apart or not being finished.
Yeah, that you hit a really important key on any kind of collaborative projects, which also includes things like marriage, right? Marriage is a collaborative project. And you need to know what your skills are. What are you bringing to the table? And where can the other person complement, right? And it's the same thing in our professional settings. What skills do you have? Where do you work your best? And what about them? And how can you divide and conquer that best meet your skill set? And I love that. That's great. What else?
We basically said the same thing that Calvin just said, is we wanted to have like a sit down one-on-one, like very casual meeting. We wanted to make sure to bring that up is like just over coffee or something so that it doesn't feel like we're trying to micromanage or we're trying to say that it doesn't feel accusatory. So having a casual conversation and then working on like what kind of compromise can we come to between the different ways that our brains work? And if that means task delegation, then that's what we're going to try and do. And then afterwards, just checking in, seeing how things are going. Is this new plan working? And if not, maybe we should consider talking to management or professors or somebody over us and just saying, hey, we've tried to work this out. We've tried new planning. It's still not working. What would you recommend at this point?
Okay, so yes, you hit a really important part. I love that you want to start it casual and as informal as possible, so that you feel like you're on the same playing field, right? You're not trying to create a new power conflict, right? Not dynamic of power. The concern that you might have is that maybe it's too informal and that person didn't really take it seriously because they didn't think it was a big deal, right? So just make sure that you have an additional check-in, which you mentioned, following up before you're jumping straight to management, right? Or straight to hierarchy. Really important to see if you can work those things out. However, if you come to this head and neither one of you can compromise or you find it more difficult, it is great to get that mediator involved, right? And if you find yourself to be the mediator, you're the manager, you're the person that's trying to help them work through this conflict, the most important thing you can do is to remain impartial, right? To hear both sides, to try to find common ground that, they're both trying to create this strong marketing project to reach XYZ audience. They have the same intention, right? They're just taking different paths. The moment you polarize your two people, you've lost one of them, right? Maybe not immediately, but they're gonna slow quitting is on the horizon, or maybe quit quitting if you damage it enough. So you want to make sure that if you are the mediator or you're the manager in this situation, that you're taking that step back, you're really listening to both sides, finding that common ground, and not playing favorites. That's the key there. So you guys had some great ideas. Or did I miss any groups? Did we get everybody?
We basically said like the same thing, like start off by establishing a common goal, finding a compromise, and also staying flexible.
Great. Yes, flexible. Oh my goodness, that is such a key, and that's part of our emotional intelligence that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But being able to be somewhat adaptable. Now, nobody should have to work under the circumstance, and I say nobody, people do, right? There are jobs that are harder and you have to work under very unknown circumstances, active military, right? There are things out there that's just part of how life is. But for the most part, none of us want to work in these circumstances where we don't know what's coming, right? And so to have that foresight and planning is so important too. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Not totally unrelated. Obviously, everything here is interconnected, but we're going to look again at media. Hopefully you see the media literacy quote now. Okay, great. So, this is a little bit longer than the ones I've been using, but media literacy is not just important, it's absolutely critical. It makes a difference between whether we are a tool of the mass media or whether the mass media is a tool for us to use. And our skill set in media varies significantly based on access and privilege, right? Like how many things did you have access to as you were growing up, right? At what age did you start learning media or digital language? That matters, right? How many different platforms you're familiar with matters. And so media literacy is going to vary based on mostly access and a lot generation, right? And so it's important to understand that we have to have discernment in media. Otherwise, it starts to use us, right? And that's why we want that too. We want for our media that we're publishing, for our companies or organizations or even our own brand, to frame and shape things. We want to do so appropriately and ethically, and we want to think about those things too. And there's way too many experiences, right, where we know there's people who are operating under different guises and it's unethical, and we have to be careful about that, especially for people who are less informed. So to understand a little bit of media literacy basics, there are 5 major pillars that media literacy works on. The first pillar is access, right? So it's what I mentioned, your ability to access multiple sources, your ability to even gain access through something, right? If your only access to information is through television, news, and commercials, that's your media information, you are not going to be as well informed or as literate as someone who's accessing media from different formats and platforms. So being able to access and knowing how to access, right? It's just like good research. If you are a student or you've ever had to do any kind of research for your organization, knowing where to get that information is so important. Often they'll be like, oh, I don't know, I just Googled this, right? Because they don't know where else to go to get good resources. And so the first part of any type of literacy is access. And so understanding that yourself, you need to know what you need to know, right? What kinds of information do you need to get? And what are the resources that you can go to get that information, right? It depends on the organization you're in. It depends on what context. But if you're working in nonprofit, Make-A-Wish, for example, and maybe you're going to need to be a lot more well-versed and informed on common treatment experiences and timelines for cancer patients and lots of different experiences, right? Medical and otherwise in Make-A-Wish. But if you are working in Habitat for Humanity, right? You need a whole different set of information. You have a different audience. You're providing different skill sets and different tools to a different group of people, and so you need to know different kinds of information. So understanding what you need to know and helping your people around you access the information they need to know is media literacy block number one. Number two is analyze, right? Like I said, we can all hop on Google and plug in some information. We have to understand how to analyze the information that's coming back to us. Because if you put in any search on Google, you're going to get a bazillion results, right? And we have to know that the first results that pop up are one of two things usually. Do you guys know what they are? The top results are usually what?
AI.
They might be, well, yeah, AI now, that's a pretty new rollout. So I'll say the top three results. AI is a summary, right? AI is very imperfect. It's a great place to start, but it's imperfect in some of the information that it pulls. What else? Let me see if the chat has it. Okay, advertising. Yes, absolutely. So you might have an advertisement, and sometimes that advertisement is under the guise of function, right? That it's pretending like it's going to give you the information it wants, but it's really targeting you in a different way. And then the third thing that might come up is the most commonly accessed or utilized. So something that's gotten the most clicks, basically. And so you have to filter through those top three things, AI, advertisements, and the most clicks, to make sure that that is still providing you with the information that you need to have that correct access. So analyze and access, very important. And then evaluating is once you get into that information, being able to evaluate for accuracy, being able to evaluate for purpose, right? Is it serving the purpose that you need? How is it serving you? What is the relationship between you and whatever this is, right? Sometimes it's an article, sometimes it's a website, sometimes it's a social media request, right? Someone wants to follow your page. It's especially difficult for those operating organizational or corporate types of media accounts, right? You have to be thoughtful about how you're going to handle, bots that are in there or people that are trying to just connect with people for identity theft and different things. And so as a business or as an organization, you want to kind of get as many followers as you can, but you also have to evaluate those followers and the commentary. That's why you have to pay attention to how people are interacting in those comment fields or whatever other fields you might have where they can engage to make sure they're using it appropriately. The other side, so these are all about like getting the information, accessing the information, what to do with that information when you have it. Creating and acting is really where you have to think about the ethics of things. And so when you create something, you have to have the understanding about what to create, where to share that information. Is there ethical concerns that you need to think about there? And then the act is really thinking about, okay, if something's not going well, what are we going to do? Having policy to follow up when there is an issue of some kind, or following that engagement and managing that engagement. So it requires some kind of a continuous act. So these 5 blocks will help you utilize media appropriately, both for professional and personal life. So just some basics that you need to know. Always understand the source. Is there some accountability? So if it's a news source, if it's an informational source, are there authors that are listed, or is there resources that are listed? Does it look real? Same thing for social media profiles, right? Someone wants to follow your page or be your friend. Do they look real? What does their friend group look like? What information are they providing? There's this balance of we want to provide some information so that we don't look fake, but we don't want to provide so much information that someone could steal our identities, right? So it's all about that balance in media as well. For everything, you want to look at purpose, right? What is the purpose of AI? That's just trying to be efficient, right? It may pull accurate or inaccurate information. What's the purpose of an ad? They're probably trying to sell you something or get you to click on their link for whatever reason, right? There might be some kind of agenda in the information that's being shared, just like a website and social media pages. And think about it from your perspective. If you're pushing information out, what is your purpose? What are you trying to show your motivation is, right? And then you want to look at accuracy. So as you're consuming media, you want to access multiple sources, you want to review the account, you want to make sure things look and appear correct and accurate. Look for things like lots of typos, look for language that is maybe not the cultural standard, right? So you'll sometimes see British spellings or other spellings or grammar that maybe doesn't quite match up to the standard of your particular culture. And in our case, like American English versus British English, things are going to look a little bit different. It's like, oh, why are you here following an Amarillo page if you're using the spelling of a British word, right? And so that can just help you with accuracy as well. And then you want to especially look for emotional language. You want to look for the high use of adjectives. How are they framing an idea, a concept, or a person? If they're using a lot of emotional language, it might not be irrelevant, right? It might be very important sharing information, but it's also probably not incredibly accurate, right? Because if you're putting emotions first, there's less facts, there's more descriptions. They're kind of telling you what to think about a thing. You have to think about that as you're pushing information out, right? Creating and acting. Are you being accountable? Are you making your information look real? Do you share openly your motivation? If there is an agenda, is that hidden, or are you letting people be well informed about what you need? You want to be accurate. You want to check your resources and make sure you're giving the most up-to-date information. You want to use correct spelling and correct grammar, especially when you're representing your organization or your own business. And then you want to be careful about that emotional language too. Are you framing particular groups of people or individuals in a particular way? You want to think about how you're doing that, right? So think about things like who your target audience is, what's the appropriate words or language to use with them. Make sure your messaging systems are clear and accurate. And then always consider, if I'm pushing this out on my organizational page, my brand, my business, whatever, if your face and name were attached to that post or the media, would you change anything, right? Would you be happy to claim that as information and media that you have shared? So another key element again in that act is to acknowledge issues that might come up and correct any issues or misinformation that might be addressed here, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a link. I'll put it in the chat. I think is probably the best option for that. So this is just a game for you to go through. You should be able to go through it on your computer or on like a phone, whatever you have access to the internet. You should be able to click on the link and take this. It is basically vetting news sources for credibility, and it gives you some information about red flags and kind of the things that you can look for as you're sifting through information. So I'm going to put that in the chat real quick. And then when you come back, we'll have you guys go into your groups and do that. So that it doesn't take it's not supposed to take very long, but let's give everybody 5 minutes. So by 2:24, be back. You can turn off your video or whatever if you want while you're doing that. By 2:24, be back and we'll get you in a group to kind of talk about the quiz, maybe some things that you noticed or how well you did. Okay. So everyone take about 30 seconds or so. If you need more time or you're not anywhere close, you can pop in the chat and let us know if you need more time, but take about 30 seconds to wrap up for that and come back to us. All right, I think we have everyone. So again, what I want you to do is you're going to get into groups. I want you to talk about your quiz and particularly what we talked about. Is there anything that you have learned, one or two things that you learned in our discussion through taking this quiz that was new information or new-ish that you will work to implement media literacy? So share that with your group, one or two nuggets that you learned from me or from the quiz that you will share. And let's say maybe 3 minutes. can always tell there's a flood when the time ends up. Okay. I would love to see if you guys will you can throw it in the chat if you want or share. What is something that you've learned either today or something recently about media literacy? It's changing all the time. It is a fast field, right? The turnover is quick. Something new will be tomorrow and something will be obsolete. And so the key is to figure out how you're going to use it. How can you take these tools and transfer them from media to format to platform to wherever each time something new comes out or something changes, right? So it's same skills, new spaces. So what are some things that you guys picked up on?
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry about that. One thing our group spoke about was that like if you're not intentionally like in a research mindset or space, then you might not notice some of these red flags that you might if you are intentionally seeking out like reputable sources.
Yes. Okay, Chloe, thank you for sharing that. That is such a good point. So this is a tool that's been used in advertising for a really long time, and it's called elaboration likelihood model. And what that really means is that they are distracting you, or you are distracted in some way. And so they feel like they can use these other tools to convince you to buy something. So it's used in advertising mostly. But it's the same idea that if you are distracted, and you are not aware and you are not actively trying to process and analyze, they will get this information into your brain and you'll be like, oh, I know what that's probably right. You know, you don't pay much attention to it. Think about advertising. They've done it for a long time. They use music, they use animals, all kinds of gimmicky things to distract you from the product or from researching other products. And having that awareness. And so be very careful about that. Things when they're elaborating, when there's more information, make sure that you're trying to get in that mindset where you're trying to discern between what's accurate, what's been embellished, and what's completely false, right? What else?
One of the things my group was talking about was how there's a distinction between um, kind of outwardly outrageous fake news, you know, in the sense of like what you'd see in old school tabloids,
Yeah.
versus stuff that's like it's just slightly tweaked to the point where it's like it's much harder to discern whether or not it's true.
Yes, you are correct. So we always feel like it'll be obvious, right? And it is, right? When I get these friend requests from so and so who's a doctor or a captain and look at me with my dog and my 20 friends, like I'm like, well, I don't even know you, dude. Like, no, you're not, I cannot be friends with you. Sometimes things are so obvious to us, but most things are not, and you are correct. Calvin, you go by Calvin? Oh, I lost him.
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, all my screen shifted. You are so correct on that it's just slight, and that's why you really have to look at that language, right? That's the important key. Looking at that emotional language, looking to make sure there's accountability, right? Are they citing their sources when they put in a fact? Are they giving you a link to something? Are they telling you where they got it? Are they willing to put their name, their face, their organization on it? To make themselves accountable for the information they're sharing. Those are all really important things. So yeah, thank you for sharing that and pointing that out. Anything else that you guys want to share or talk about or ask? Okay. Well, remember those 5 pillars, especially the access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act as you go through. And that's just embedded in every step of every type of media you use. We know statistically and in correlation that media is changing the way our brains function. It's changing self-esteem. The younger you have access to media, the lower your self-esteem, typically, at least early on, like ages 13 to 18. We know that there's a lot of negative things about media, right? Same thing that people know about smoking, but it doesn't stop us from always using or doing these things, right? Smoking has come full circle. So just give you an example of how things roll out as something that is like a good thing for society. Smoking was rolled out that way. It was rolled out as a stimulant for energy to help you maintain a healthy weight. It even talked about keeping a healthy young glow, right? Well, fast forward 25 years from that, they started putting the Surgeon General's warnings about how it can cause cancer and different things. When I was a kid, which in my head doesn't feel like that long ago, but was long enough ago, people smoked everywhere, right? You were smoking in buildings, in hospitals, in airplanes, literally. Everybody smoked everywhere. And I see Susan shaking her head, yes, too. So yeah, yes, people smoke everywhere. And it took a long time for the cultural mindset about smoking to change and to have this organized effort to be like, I want you well informed if you decide to make this decision, right? And now I rarely see people smoking. If you're not allowed on campus smoking, you're not allowed in a lot of buildings smoking. It's just shifted, right? The entire culture. We're in that early phase for media, or where we're just kind of discovering some of these problems, right? Because media became widespread, mass media is all like radio, right? Newspapers. There's been mass media for a long time. But this very fast digital resources have changed quickly on us. And so we are just now about, I mean, my daughter is 19, she just turned 19, and she was born 1 year before the first iPhone came out. So the first iPhone is like 18 years old, right? Is barely an adult, right? The iPhone is an adult now. And so we're just now, it took a whole generation of growth to an adult to figure out what some of these issues might be. And so it's really important to harness these tools, understand that there's dangers, understand that there's harm, understand that there's an ethical responsibility for you too, for what you're sharing from your platform, from your organization's platform, what information you're giving out to people as we move forward. We're not going to stop using media, right? It's not going to be like smoking. Like, media is here to stay, but learning how to utilize it and discern is going to be the key, right? Media literacy is what has to improve there. So hopefully a little bit of nuggets there. I appreciate you guys sharing that with me, all of those things that you guys talked about. So let me get you back to PowerPoint here. All right. This is less of a quote, more of a statistic. 75% of careers are derailed for reasons related to emotional competencies, including the inability to handle interpersonal problems, unsatisfactory team leadership during times of conflict or difficulty, and the inability to adapt to change or to elicit trust, to get people to trust you and for you to trust other people. And so this part is all under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, or what we call emotional IQ. And you can have a high IQ intellect, right? That means that you have a high ability to process new information and to learn something new. That's what a high IQ means, right? It's people say, oh, it just means I'm smarter. What it really means is that your brain, your machine is able to process information at a higher level, more of it at a deeper level than someone else might be able to. Emotional IQ is the same, but the thing about emotional IQ is that it's also part of our mental IQ, right? Our intellect. It's also part of our physical IQ, right? So how you're using your body and what you're doing to take care of that. So the emotional IQ affects all parts of us and everybody that we're around. So it's the same idea, right? It's the ability to process emotions, to understand why someone else might feel a particular way. It is overall your own level of emotional awareness, right? So that's what emotional IQ is. It's your level of awareness and your ability to express verbally in words and to fully understand what you're feeling and why. It's also your ability to understand to let someone else feel how they feel and to understand why they might feel that way, right? It's crucial in all interpersonal contexts. So workplace, professional, colleagues, boss, and obviously in personal, friends, and relationships. But a lot of people are unaware of their own emotional states. Disney made a lot of waves when they came out with Inside Out, which helped kids especially to really understand that interaction between how your emotions are over here and your logic is trying to maintain this and how it can impact you overall. And also just like naming it, right? Like if that's anger, that's disgust, right? Most of the time we feel multiple emotions at once. So it's obviously broken down and we're not just feeling basic emotions most of the time. It's a blend. But what gaining higher emotional IQ means is that you have to practice that mindfulness that we've been talking about. You have to have time for reflection, right? Self-reflection, reflection on others, reflection on what you're doing in a day-to-day basis. It requires patience because we want things, especially in the way we've been programmed, right? We want things to happen instantly, and emotions don't do that, right? They're heightened, they come up and down. Sometimes they're unsuspecting, and we can't control them, right? As much as we want to, they exist as a reaction to something in our environment, right? We have an affect, and the emotion is the effect. It does require a certain level of awareness to understand, why am I feeling this way? What is my affect? And to understand that for other people and to let them express it or help them identify what that thing might be. And we accomplish that through empathy by hearing how other people are feeling. Why do they think they're feeling that way, etc. So I have this great image here by Think Psych that has the 5 components of emotional intelligence. One is social skills, right? The higher you are emotionally in your emotional IQ, the better you are able to manage long-term relationships and form relationships. You have high self-awareness, and so you're able to kind of manage the things in your life that create issues or help or hinder you in some way. Self-regulation is so important in the way that you don't let your emotions, you recognize them, you understand they exist, but you don't let them control your reactions, right? So example would be anger, to be angry, to be frustrated, but not to throw a chair across the room, right? That is regulation of the emotion. The empathy is understanding that other people might feel differently. You may feel a really big emotional wave from something that happens that might barely be a blip of emotion on someone else's radar, right? So we respond differently to different things too, and that's important to understand. Knowing that emotions directly impact our ability to make decisions, right? We want to act on emotions sometimes, and while you can't separate them and you should honor them and recognize them, be careful of making emotional decisions only, which is why higher emotional IQ, you understand there's patience. Let me think about this 3 different times in 3 different spaces and days before I make a full decision on a big decision, right? And so when you have higher emotional intelligence, all of those areas work together to just improve your life in general, right? I'm going to add to the chat again, just a very quick quiz for emotional IQ. Let's test the emotional IQ. All right, so that link is in the chat room. And let me look at time. We got 19 minutes as a whole. So let's say let's take 4 minutes. Everybody be back by 2:45. And you can go ahead and turn off your video if you want. But everyone complete this emotional intelligence quiz 5 minutes. Has everyone had time to complete that? I hope. Okay, good. So hopefully that gave you just a little bit of insight. Obviously, there are more extensive assessments, and some of the things here that I ask you to do, I hope that they spark just a little bit more investigation for yourself, right? There's nothing that can be awareness in emotional IQ. And so the more you know, the more you explore, and the more you understand how things change and get more information, just always staying aware and having that awareness is so important. So hold on, sorry. Let me share, I'm going to share a video that is just some simple ways to develop that emotional IQ. And then we're going to talk about how that can be utilized for understanding in different contexts, right? Using emotional IQ as kind of a toolbox to step into these different contexts. And we'll wrap up and finish up very soon. So let's watch this video together first, though. And let me know if there's any issues with the video if you're unable to watch it or see it or hear it.
I don't hear anything yet. I don't know if there is noise right now, but
You're not hearing anything?
I'm not. Not from the video. I hear you, but not the video.
Oh, Do you see the video?
Yep.
Interesting. See. You know what? For time's sake, I'm just gonna put the link in and you guys can go watch the video yourself. How about that? The video itself is about 7 minutes, so let's be back here by 2:55. Still? Okay, and everybody can watch it on their own. All right, so just in summary for emotional IQ, know that this is not something you get and it's done, right? It is something that you work on consistently. And if you find, one of the things to hopefully take away from the video is that if you find yourself stagnant, right? You find your mind is not stagnant, you're not getting the stimulation, you're not feeling great, you're not understanding maybe that funk that we've talked about. We've all kind of mentioned a space in our lives at some point that has not felt quite where we would like to be. Take that time to engage in something new, right? Learning about other people, other ideas, other values through books and theater and music, those are all valuable. Talk to new people. Talk to the people you know that you just don't ever get to see, right? That can be very useful as well. And also things like just exercise and water, as much as people just like to say that culturally and like how do you build in time, it's such an important mechanism in well-being. And then when we have this higher IQ, we're able to take that and use it as a toolbox in context. So for example, in business, we can understand that the largest growing group of business industry is a various demographic, and that we have the largest portion of our population growth is those of immigrants, and so multiple cultures and languages coming into the business space. Being emotionally aware helps you to be prepared and have a sensitivity about beliefs and how people use time and how things, how people work under different situations. It lets you to learn ambiguity and being flexible and be a careful listener, and hear what the needs are of the people in the workspace. And then try to negotiate areas of compromise and agreement, right? And we can do that. Emotional IQ helps us to better address conflict. It also can help us in educational context. The main social function of education is to create societal members, right? And so you learn things that you transfer from education into society, about how to work together, how to complete tasks, how to be on time, how to address authority. All of those things are societal functions, in addition to the content, right, that you're getting, of course. And there's a lot of different cultures in that space. So you're learning to work with various people and beliefs and ideas and different genders and different ages and all of those things that make us different from one another. If you're going into education, your emotional IQ can help you find ways to build that bridge into your diverse space, into this various group of people that find themselves in the classroom together to learn about Romeo and Juliet or whatever, right? And transfer this back to their relevance in their lives. That emotional IQ helps you to transfer information to your audience and whatever that information is. And it's important to know that public schools in the United States today are about 45% culturally and linguistically diverse. That means they have different perspectives, religions, ideologies. Their first language is not English, whatever it is, right? There's just this vast group of change, right? We're not a synonymous population, and so being in a space where you're trying to teach all of these individuals something, that emotional IQ can help with that as well. And helping them build IQ, emotional IQ is important. It's also important to understand with that IQ, emotional IQ and awareness, in that there's usually 3 different approaches to medicine that you'll encounter with your patients, with doctors, with medical professionals, whatever. There's the supernatural religious tradition, which adheres to kind of faith and this higher power, that there's this impact that can happen from somewhere else. And the patient often relies on that positive association between the self, treatment, and belief, along with whatever else is happening in that medical context. The holistic tradition really wants to focus on not just treating the body, but treating the mind and treating the environment, right? And so it's this treatment from multiple approaches, where the scientific biomedical perspective is to treat whatever's invading or causing the problem, right? Removing the problem. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it aging problems and processes? Like whatever it is, it's a management or a removal. And so understanding if you're in a healthcare context, you will encounter individuals with these varying perspectives, and that emotional IQ can help you in that space as well. So as a whole, just to remember this mindfulness theme that's been going on across all of our sessions. So just in communication in general, being mindful allows you to have that empathy and that high emotional IQ and show respect for others, recognizing cultural differences, belief systems, but also commonalities and similar goals, right? Places where we can connect as humans, no matter our age difference or our gender difference, whatever that is. And then accepting responsibility for your behavior. So again, that ethical piece of I'm putting information and putting an experience out there. How am I impacting others? So all of that to say, I really appreciate you guys allowing me to come in and be with you and share this information with you these 3 sessions. And if you do need me or have questions or want to just come say hi, I would welcome any of that. And this is how you can contact me. So I wish you all, I know we don't really have time for questions. I'm happy to stay here if there are any concerns or questions, or if Hannah needs to address anything. I'll stay until everyone else is gone. But otherwise, thank you guys for letting me be here. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend and have a great summer that's coming up for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll hang out for a little bit if anybody needs anything. So feel free to stay on. So yeah, here if y'all need anything.